It's on. So I've been asked to sing between now and 7 p.m. because I've written special songs for various people that I met here. Okay, that's a joke. I should sing. If your life depended on me singing, you had better hope that the situation will change. So we have a final panel on a very, not just a very important topic, on an extremely important topic, privacy and freedom of expression. And can I just invite the panelists, Fortune, James, Michael, and Marian? Can you please join me here? I'll sit where there's no one. That's easy, right? Okay, that's easy.
And I was avoiding being next to you.
Okay. I know we stand between you and your flight tonight, for those who live in tonight, and for others who are going out, but you can be sure that we'd have so much fun that no one will want to leave this room. So I'm going to start by asking, maybe we'll just do it this way. I will start with you, Michael. And just for context, let me introduce everyone. So Michael, though Michael works with the Zambia Police Service, as you can see on his tag, he will be speaking for himself. So you can't quote him and say, Michael on behalf of the Zambian Police Service. Marian is a member of parliament in South Africa here, and I'm sure that you can quote her as a member of parliament. Fortune is with Google, and I'm sure you can quote him and say, Google. James is with the Ministry of ICT, Postal and Courier Services from Zimbabwe, and I'm sure you can quote him, okay? One of the things I will ask that we do today is, we're having an interesting conversation, but I ask that please don't leave out the tough questions. This is a conversation we've had over time. This is a conversation that has sent sparks flying, and it's great and it's okay. Because when we pretend about conversations, we're not doing anyone a favor. We've got someone from a private sector, someone from parliament, someone from a security agency, and someone from a ministry. And someone asked earlier for the number of civil society people in the room, and we have a lot of people from civil society, so I trust that this will be a great conversation. Let me start with you, Michael. So we're discussing privacy and freedom of expression, and the context is that over the last few years, and we can give examples. I can start with the example of Tanzania, and I'm sure that many of us have heard that Tanzania has now passed a bill that requires every blogger to register. It's just waiting for the signature of the minister. That's if he hasn't signed already. Every blogger has to register. Every cyber cafe has to, put up rules in terms of if anybody posts some content while in your cyber cafe, then as an intermediary, you become liable. So there are things, like that are happening. And there have been questions, for example, countries like Nigeria, where the army has said, we're going to be monitoring social media. We want to see who is talking about secession. We want to see people talking about terrorism, and things like that. So within this context, there's also, while people are talking about the need for, states talking about security, there's also the fact that citizens are becoming a lot more aware. Citizens are talking a lot more about freedom of expression. So what I'm asking the four of you to say is, based on what you do and your own personal views, what do you see in terms of the kind of complexity we have right now between, within this conversation, privacy versus security, and what are your thoughts on achieving balance, if possible?
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah. You see, topics of this nature are very, very complex because they hinge on your personal safety and your private life. Matters to do with the privacy are more personal. Again, matters to do with security are like they override, that's my own opinion, they override everything because you can't have the privacy and not being secure. So basically, my personal opinion is, in as much as like I've been hearing almost all the conversations like from the session since we began, there's been the talk about people being, like the states being like doing the surveillance on the part of their citizens, and people would be like, we don't trust the government. To me, basically, you should actually trust your government, because whether you trust a private entity whose data protection like policies you may not understand, and yet you give them almost all your private information, you give them almost everything about you, and yet when it comes to the state, when it comes to your government, you tend to like have an extra eye on trying to see what would they do with this data. But we are forgetting one thing, that just with a mere search warrant, I can still get that information from Facebook. I can still get that information from Google. It doesn't need a state to collect information from its citizens, but the private sector will still get the information which the state can still obtain through a warrant. So meaning matters of privacy, to me, it's not something that is absolute. It's something that is relative. It's for as long as we go online, we should somehow know that our privacy is compromised, whether we like it or not, because the surveillance aspect of it is bulkily done by the corporate organizations, not for your own safety. Mostly it's for their own profit.
So I have a few questions for you, but I'll come back to that. But before you pass on the mic, and I don't think, I think everyone has a mic with them. Just a very quick question, and I'm not asking you alone, I'm asking everyone in the room. I'd like to see, by a show of hands, how many of us think that there is a valid reason why people don't trust their governments? I'm asking you to.
Yeah,
are you raising your hand?
I was. I trust my government. I trust my government because I'm part of it.
Oh, I see. Okay, all right. Miriam.
Is this on? Yes. A lot of what Michael has said is very valid. With the freedom of expression and the freedom to access the internet and the world comes a fair amount of responsibility. First and foremost is your own personal responsibility. Users need to realize that whatever they put online is not necessarily private. So you can choose, I'm actually amazed at how careless people are with what they put online about themselves. And, they turn on their location services all the time, so you can fairly easily track where they are all the time. So I think that it needs to be far more care by individuals on what information they choose to put out there, and then to actually, sometimes bear the responsibility. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not able to express an opinion. Of course they are, as long as that doesn't involve hate speech or the incitement to do harm, which are the basic things. A controversial opinion is absolutely fine. Now, governments should also respect that if they subscribe to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, for example, that they must respect people's rights to put an opinion there, and they shouldn't actually police that unless there is an incitement to cause harm. And as Michael said, if they want to find out who you are and where you are, they can make a formal warrant for information from your service providers. And then we can perhaps talk later as to how protective those service providers should be about their customers, who are the likes of us.
Thank you.
Are we on? Thank you. I want to start by saying you're looking very smart, by the way.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Did someone record that?
Yeah. So, I think for me, what I want to start by saying is from Google's perspective, our mission, most people may not know it, is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible, right? So just at the level of that mission, you understand that we are it's almost like a political statement to some people, because it's which information are you organizing and who are you making it accessible to and stuff like that. It becomes very political. I'm sure our founders, Larry and Sergey, when they thought of it in a garage some 19 years ago, they never thought that they would be at the center of most freedom of expression debates going on around the world as they are today. So from that mission, then leading on to it, our approach most of the time is to err on the side of free expression. Because our recognition is that if freedoms of expression exist offline, they should extend and also exist online. And we've got many beautiful international instruments and localized constitutions and policies and laws all over the world that allow free expression. So what we are doing as a company is to make those a reality online. That's the bottom line. But what then we've seen over the years, especially we talk about, let's say, the Arab Spring and stuff like that, is that we've seen governments becoming very nervous about the internet to a point that a friend of mine yesterday in a panel said that some African governments, when they see social media or the internet, they see revolution, right? So the moment they see revolution, they'll be like, let's kill this thing right now. They see it as a threat rather than as an enabler of them to communicate their own programs and to look good in front of people and communicate to citizens, but also for citizens to talk back to government and engage constructively. So I think if we're not going to shift that mindset and see this tool as an enabler, we are still going to be very suspicious of an otherwise very beautiful medium. So I think this is where we need to sort of try to understand in the context of the discussion.
Thank you. Excuse me. Before I come to James, I think you touched on something that is important and maybe we don't think a lot about. Now, don't forget that many of the people, many of the leaders across the continent today who are suspicious of social media led revolutions themselves. So they know that when you lead a revolution, there's only one thing you do. You get rid of the guy who's there so you can take charge. And that's the way many of them see social media. But I think that's a good thing because that shows citizen power. James.
Facilitator, I'm actually surprised. For the past few days, I see government on trial. We've been labeled culprits, but we are accommodative. I'm speaking as government. We are quite aware of your concerns, especially civil society, about surveillance, about infringement of free speech, and about granting of excessive power to our law enforcement agents. Yes, your arguments can be strong, especially when you get people citing revelations like those of Snowden, where he revealed mass surveillance programs happening in America in 2013. But there are reasons why the state behaves like it does. It is our duty as government to protect you, to guarantee national security, to guarantee your public safety, and to make sure that you are free from any terrorist attack. So, yes, these discussions may go on. We have been accused. But remember, governments have been participating in this fora as an equal partner. We have turned multi-stakeholder as equal partners. Recall we talk about PPPs, public-private partnerships, and we are actually extending that partnership to be multi-stakeholder. So let's tackle this problem together. You need us. We are government.
Thank you. So I found it interesting that you said we government, you citizens. I wish I could tell you the story of a government official in Nigeria who was the National Security Advisor and wasn't always talked about protecting citizens in case of terrorism and things like that. And then one day he became a citizen, and then he got arrested. And then he began to sing songs about human rights. And at that point, he became a citizen. So I think it's important, to point that out. Let me come to you first of all, Michael. You said a few things about, government has to do these things to protect us, and of course that's the same thing that James has just talked about. But I want to put this question to you: are there times when government has exceeded its own authority? For example, you mentioned the ease with which government can get, warrants and get your information. Are there times that government has either exceeded authority or deliberately clamped down on citizens, thereby leading to a situation where people are suspicious of government?
You see, these conversations are difficult in nature because, like, I'm from the law enforcement agency. My law is not to interpret the law. My law is to enforce the law. We see these laws being enacted. We don't say anything. We see these laws being drafted. We don't say anything. It's when these laws are applied and when we are hit hard, that's when we tend to think these laws are bad. Most of these cybercrime laws have been in existence for some time, but because the penetration of the internet at that time was not all that as it is right now. As a result, social media is the new phenomenon which we are all adopting. Like when I joined Facebook in 2007. Very few of us were on Facebook. And if you are seen on Facebook, people were actually having different divergent views that it's not a good platform. But now they've seen that it's a platform that everyone else needs. It's a platform where people can even do business. It's a platform where people can express their views. Those days, people would go and express their views on phone-in programs, or they would write letters to the editor of a newspaper. But this time around, newspapers and broadcasters and all news gathering agencies, they get their news from social media. So basically, I'm not somebody who supports a situation where you go beyond the law to actually infringe citizens' rights, to infringe or probably punish somebody. I'll give an example. Say, one of you, I'm a married man. Then somebody else is going out with my wife, and yet I have the state apparatus to my advantage. Then I use those apparatus to probably to actually start surveilling my wife and her movements, and I think that is when it goes beyond control. That is totally abuse. So basically, yes, I may agree with you. Abuse has always been there. Abuse has always been there for reasons not probably I can't say because I may not have been the person privileged or to be leading a group or being involved in such. But we've led, in Africa, we've seen where freedom of expression has been clamped down. We've seen various incidences where citizens have lost the internet. Right now, Togo has no internet. I don't think the internet is on. To me, that is the other way of failing to accept dissent. It's another way of trying to live to reality, because whether you shut down the internet, people will still hold their views in their minds. People will still organize. Prior to independence, there was no internet. But we managed to do what? To get independence. There was not, the phones were not there. But the struggle went on and we succeeded. So whether we clamp on the internet, whether we enact laws to stifle dissent and probably criminalize freedom of expression, to me, it will not actually achieve the desired results. We should just accept the change is here. should accept now that we should find modern ways of policing, we should find modern ways of actually making people's lives safer and like making people's lives not safe.
I like that. There are two things. One is you've talked about the fact that internet shutdowns are not good things. We all agree. I'm sure everyone in this room agrees with that. But the interesting thing is actually, and I'm sure we all know this, when you do shut down the internet, the content you're trying to prevent from spreading actually spreads faster. Another point that you mentioned, and that takes me straight to you, Marian, is you talked about laws, about how bad laws are basically tools in the hands of security agencies that they have to implement. It is not their duty to say this is a bad law, so I can't implement it. Let me come to you, Marian. This is what you do, right? You do laws. Are you seeing an increasing level of engagement from citizens and civil society organizations in terms of bills and proposed laws before they get passed by parliament?
Yes, I would say that there is. I think one thing that I've been incredibly encouraged by in South Africa in the past perhaps 18 months, more than in the previous 15 years, is increased energy into citizen activism. And I think that's because our country's in a particular sort of parlous state right now. But citizens have become incredibly, incredibly active, and that is wonderfully encouraging. I think internet has perhaps been part of that. But I think also that citizens realize that their rights and their futures is being jeopardized right now by the nature of government. So yes, we have a lot of activity when we have laws, when we have public hearings, 2 days worth of public hearings or whatever it is on any issue. We get a lot of citizen organizations coming to talk to us. And they're very vocal and they're very informed. And I'm afraid that a lot of the time it's pearls before swine. And I'm obviously talking about many of my colleagues in Parliament, is that I don't think that's very well received. I think particularly in the issues of technical issues like cyber issues, members of Parliament are not properly educated and make very little effort, I think, to inform themselves about the technology, which is complex. I mean, I've been at it for, 5, 6 years, and I still don't understand an awful lot of it. But at least I try. So I think that a lot of parliamentarians are lazy, and that they don't necessarily take on board much of what the public presents to them. That is our fault, not the citizens' fault. And I think that a lot of engagement needs to happen offline, simply on a one-on-one basis with Parliament in South Africa particularly, because a personal interaction makes a lot more effective than a presentation to a committee, which may or may not be listening.
So I'll still come back to you for a cheat sheet on how to engage parliamentarians. But I'm glad you were the one who said parliamentarians are lazy, because if I said that in my country, some people will call it hate speech. Wrongly so. There are people who have said things that are not, that strong a statement, that have spent 2 weeks in jail, across the continent. Fortune, you guys provide infrastructure and a platform, right, to allow, what Marian was just describing in terms of new opportunities for citizens to engage and all that. I'm going to ask you 2 questions. One is, so you and Twitter and Facebook and other platforms provide a transparency report that many have said is not transparent enough, right? I'm going to push you a bit on that. Is it possible to provide a bit more details, or is it something you will consider a violation to provide a bit more details so that citizens that want to engage this report can be able to say, this exactly is what my government has done, and this is wrong, and would like to go to court on it. That's on one end. On the other end, what trends are you seeing in terms of citizen engagement across, either for search or for connections and things? What trends are you seeing, across, Google, especially on the continent?
Okay, thank you. So first, I want to start with dispelling the myth from many government officials that there is a dichotomy between freedom of expression and protecting citizens. There is no dichotomy. Both can exist. Citizens can have the right to freely express themselves, and government has the duty to protect its borders from terrorism or whatever threats. They can still go ahead and do that. There's no dichotomy at all. And this is not like a black and white situation. So when I say freedom of expression, I am not saying I'm just going to go ahead and say or do whatever I want at the risk of protecting my own country and so on and so forth. So let's get that out of the way. I think the major problem, coming back to your second question around how citizens are organizing, we have government officials that are still stuck in the past, where they were used to one-to-many forms of communication. You know, your broadcaster, your public broadcaster. One message, you know, forward, do this, national development to millions, and then you hope that the millions follow. Now, what's happening with the advent of the internet is that citizens now have got many-to-many. They can share among each other, among peers and stuff, and maybe people are feeling uncomfortable that they are not controlling that message. They don't even know what's happening. That's what makes them so nervous about this. Remember, in the typical old-day coups, what did they used to do when they want to do a coup? First is State House. What's the next one? Is the broadcaster, right? But not today. When you do a coup or you want to do a coup or to dispel a coup, what do? They shut down the internet. So it just shows you how central this has become. And at Google, we're very, very much aware of this. So we've seen big rise, almost by 1,000%, ever since we launched the Transparency Report. So for those who may not know, the Transparency Report is a report that we publish. It first started off as an annual report, which shows which governments requested information or requested us to take down specific information, blog posts or videos, or user information, for example, if they're investigating crimes in the case of law enforcement. And then we go on to say what decision we took and what is the reason. So it's a global report. It's got all the countries that approach us. We've seen, as I've said, 1,000% increase over the years. And funny enough, it's not what you would say your usual suspect countries that are high in the list. You'll be surprised because some of the countries that are high in that list are your Germany and your Brazil, for example. In South Africa, we had, last year I think we had 2, of which both we turned down. And all of this is publicly available information, right? So coming back to your question, people are saying it's not transparent enough. Well, maybe we could still improve. Like right now we've improved because we're now publishing it twice a year. So we've launched something, I think it's innovative, it's taking us somewhere. If there's more need for improvement, maybe we can relook into that. But remember, we're trying to balance many things here. We're trying to balance the public's right to know, but also to protect the private interests of some people who may be private citizens involved in all of this. So for example, if we grant permission to, let's say, take down information or a video, we normally put the reason why and the court order that was put before us. So I think we're really showing that we're doing these decisions based on what was given to us and we're acting on it. It's not out of our own whim. When we refuse to take down, we merely apply standards like, you know, if this is not hate speech, because people convolute things. The difference between me saying something annoying and saying and uttering hate speech is that people at times get annoyed by what people say. I get annoyed by Justin Bieber, for example, but I cannot take him down, right? So there is that big difference. And at times we have to, as Marian has said, we have to educate government officials that, listen, this is not hate speech, hasn't violated any rules. We've got a very good example from South Africa about 2 years ago, where it was during a funeral. So the person who died was, I would say, an exotic dancer. So the funeral was happening in Tshwane, and then her friends came and they wanted to celebrate her life, and they broke into the dances that she used to do when she was alive. Video was a big hit on YouTube. It's a funeral, they are dancing funny, they're children, they're adults. totally very bad taste, but it's not illegal. So the government approached it and said, take that down. We said, no, it hasn't broken any laws. So that's some of the challenges that we face on the daily.
It hasn't broken any laws. I'm coming to you now, James. Okay, so this is on record. We know that Zimbabwe shut down WhatsApp, right? Now, I said I was going to push you, on this a bit. Two questions for you, sir. One, do governments actually have data to back the claim that when we shut down and do these things, we're protecting your lives? Does government have that data to prove that? Because I think, and I'm sure many people think, that it's a very convenient excuse to give. And the second question is this. From some of the incidents that have happened, so WhatsApp was shut down, people talked about it shouldn't be done and things like that. Do you internally have these conversations about this kind of international and even local feedback to say that, you know what, we did this now, should we do it again, or how do we do it? Because it looks like many times it's just a reactive thing. Togo, citizens are protesting, shut it down. It looks like there are no lessons between these violations. So these are the two questions for you. Are there lessons learned? And secondly, is there really, really, really empirical data showing that these shutdowns that we call violations many times actually do protect the people you claim they're protecting?
Thank you. In terms of evidence, I would say if you go on social media, you get clear videos. For example, in our case, politically we are struggling with earlier with the Baba Jukwa case. Somebody just comes online and then they start peddling information that can unseat a government. Then we also have the case of this flag, where the sitting government feels threatened. So that's the evidence. It's clear, it's there online.
Sorry, are you saying that this flag, for example, is evidence that government is preventing danger to citizens?
No.
Okay.
It's like the crime would be you are trying to unseat a constitutionally elected government.
Okay, let's say it this way. Is it a crime to express my opinion that my president, Buhari, is sick and should resign?
Yeah. In fact,
no, I think it's important to have these conversations. And I know that you're in a tough corner here because you do work for government and you will be quoted. But I think that it is important for us to have these conversations because at the end of the day, every government official is not going to be there forever. Even the oldest people who have been in power for forever will leave someday. So I think it's important to have these conversations because then they will need to be protected like we need to be protected right now. Okay, please go ahead. Government support.
I'm just coming in for my brother. You see, Zambia is one unfortunate country which has lost two sitting presidents. We lost President Mwanawasa in 2008 in office. We recently lost President Sata in 2014. So basically, as he said, I'll say it like in somebody's law trying to express their feelings, like on matters to do with the health of the president. I know your president was in London for close to 90 days, if I'm not mistaken. But it's long, like, to start spreading stories, to start expressing your views with stories that are not verified. I'm one person who belongs to some WhatsApp group with some Nigerians. I could see some stories coming from London that the president has died. So if that one comes in an unverified manner, because the person who's supposed to announce is the government spokesperson or somebody top in the hierarchy of government. But if that information is being shared on WhatsApp, it's going everywhere. Before you know it, people will be in the streets trying to accuse the government that you are hiding something from us. You saw what happened in Nigeria when Yaradua was sick. Who was vocal when Yaradua was sick?
Buhari.
Thank you. Was he arrested?
It couldn't have been as an ex-head of state, but people were arrested. And I think it's important to say at this point that when government refuses to provide adequate information about state officials, you have no right to complain if people guess. You have no right.
No, in the process of trying to release that information, you don't just release any information like anything else. At times, you have to look at the situation in the country. There are issues of the economy. You release this information today, your currency crumbles. You release this information today, investors pack their bags and go. So you have to balance up things from security, the economy, and the safety of the nation. So basically, don't in as much as you know it's true, but you must send some pointers to see how the information will be received. You don't just like say the president has died. People who are just flown into your country to come and invest, they won't even have their passport stamped. They will say, we are going back.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go back to James for a second, but trust me, investors are more worried about the actions of governments than the rumors about presidents being dead or not. Trust me, trust me. There are things that governments do that scare them more than if, asking whether the president... Yes, James.
Yes. You had a second question.
Yes.
Concerning shutdowns. Yes. All I want to say right now is to clarify our new stance. Okay. We are quite aware, as some presenters earlier on have observed, that sometimes you are shooting yourself in the leg when you shut down the internet. My honorable minister, who is the Minister of ICT, Postal and Courier Services, is on record to have said, we will no longer shut down the internet. But that doesn't mean that there won't be surveillance, necessary surveillance.
Necessary and proportionate? Okay. I'm not standing to ask him questions. I'm coming to you because I heard some people coughing, and I know it has nothing to do with anything flying in the air. I know you have questions. Okay, I see the ends. How many questions? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm just going to take this. Do I have a roaming mic? Or it's fine. It's okay. This is an exercise. So I'll take these 5 questions. Please direct your questions at anyone. And there are 2 rules. 1, questions must be answered. Second rule, people have a right to say, please don't quote them directly. Okay? Is that fair? All right. But don't forget now, Cameroon has announced they will no longer shut down the internet, and Zimbabwe has also said the same thing. So if it happens...
Hi. My name is Patricia, and I'm from Uganda. When James was speaking, I could swear that my ICT minister was, because you repeated exactly what he says, word for word. So our internet has been shut down twice in 2016, and it's really interesting because our minister has exactly the same things to say like you do. Uganda. Right. So national security, blah, blah, blah. But I just want you to maybe speak on the growing sentiment that you apply double standards to when an issue of national security can be claimed, right? Because even Zimbabwe, because I think our countries are very similar, you particularly, for example, pick on certain people who may or may not be seen as, I think you said, threaten the government, right? And so I'm just curious, when you're applying these standards, do you honestly believe that they are fair and that they cut across, or are you just picking and choosing when issues of national security can be cited?
So I know you mentioned James, but James, and I'm going to put the other people who work in government, also even in parliament, on the spot for that. please, do you mind noting the questions, or do you want to take them one? Please note the questions so that we can get some more time. You're number 2. Where's my number 3?
Good morning. This is good afternoon. It's good morning somewhere. All right, so my question is for Google, for Fortune. No, it's an easy one. Gosh, I'm developing this reputation. It's terrible, I'm sorry. Actually, at one point, Google was working on its own internet offerings, including a balloon that would kind of circumvent some of these internet outages in countries. Where are you on the development of those internet access tools?
That's an easy one. Okay, number 3. Who's number 4 and 5, right? Oh, we have a man. Thank God.
Okay, I'm not really sure who mentioned the issue of how we need to change the mindset of governments so that they don't see the internet as a threat, because whenever they think of the internet, they see revolution. I wanted to ask, wouldn't that particular mindset have emanated from American policy? Because America has been pushing internet freedom as part of their foreign policy. And they have instrumentalized the internet to say, this is the tool that we need you to use to come against your dictatorships. And I'll give an example. With the Iranian protests that happened in 2009, there was all this excitement. The commentary around it was, oh, this is, the Twitter revolution, and, Twitter is doing what the UN failed to do, what sanctions failed to do, what the EU failed to do. So there was that celebratory tone. In fact, one US State Department employee even sent an email to Twitter, because Twitter had a scheduled maintenance, to say, can you please defade, because it will disrupt the protests. Twitter is winning the war in Iran. And after the protests, which didn't change the regime, by the way, there was a heavy crackdown on the protesters. And they created a cybercrime task force. They had the police trawling through social media, emailing people who are abroad to say, stop what you're doing, otherwise your relatives will be trouble. They were posting pictures of the protesters on websites, pro-government websites, to say, tell us who these people are. And they would circle the names, and they caught at least 40 people whom they then harassed. So I feel like we shouldn't take for granted. Where did we get the notion that the internet is a tool that favors the freedom lover? Because it can as easily favor the oppressive governments, like in Azerbaijan, for example, where they have what they call political technologists. The government just gives these people money to create spoof accounts and harass the opposition online. So we have to consider all these other possibilities. Who told us that the internet is the tool that's rescuing us? Perhaps sometimes we have to start from context.
Okay. Context. Edward Snowden, Donald Trump.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My question is to those who are involved in working with government. If government is shutting down the internet to protect its citizens, so to say, or as you put it, doesn't it add up to the whole analogy of there's a murderer in this village, so let us go and arrest the entire village so that we can, in the process, deal with the murderer? Because that is basically what is happening when you shut off the internet because of one or two things or one or two people whose views are not acceptable to the government. And if the government is saying that they still continue to monitor and check the communication, what is so hard about having clear processes and procedures of dealing with specific individuals who are carrying out specific activity on the internet and working with the service providers to get them offline? Because it is possible technically, and it makes more sense because then it doesn't interfere with the day-to-day business of everybody else who's using the internet positively. So let's stop putting the whole country into jail and start addressing the specific individuals who need to be put in jail. Because this is putting children, mothers, everybody wholesale into your prisons and saying, stay there because in the process you have dealt with the one criminal who are trying to reach.
Okay, we got that. I'm sure it is put people in jails that should be in jail.
Okay, thank you very much. My question is perhaps mostly directed to the Zimbabwean ICT representative. Well, I just want to say, we have a new constitution in Zimbabwe, and you say people, when they blog, when they post on Facebook, they pose a threat to a constitutionally elected government. Now, that same constitution that protects the government also protects the citizen. That is the right to privacy, the freedom of expression. And it's all there in the new constitution, which is precisely the reason why you could not have the draft cybercrime bill from flying. So the government is accountable to its people. And then we must ask ourselves, if someone posts that Mugabe is dead, and 3 million people are sharing or like that post, the government must begin to ask themselves, why are people excited when they say Mugabe is dead? And that's the reality of. And then we need to ask ourselves, who is the government that this law is protecting? Is not the government the people? And the people elect those people. And when they are not in love with those people, they have a right to say no. Just as when you're not in love with someone, you have a right to break up with them. Thank you.
Please don't break up with anyone today. Please. Emotional amnesty until 12 midnight. All right. You heard the questions. Who wants to go first?
Let me take. No. Sorry, let me take because mine will be dealt with. I don't want to be in the crossfire of government. So quickly, on access projects, it's not that we were building access projects to enable them to circumvent any jurisdiction. It's just an infrastructure project. They're still going on, some of them, in about 8 cities in Africa right now. We're digging up fiber, we're experimenting with all sorts of technologies. The issue we're trying to address there is how can people get access to the internet in areas where there's poor infrastructure. So it's basically that. It's still experimental, we'll see if it works or not. I think the other thing that I want to address is from my sister Delta about is this not American ideologies? I think we need to take a bit of a step back. You have to note that since time immemorial, those who have power have not been comfortable with other forms of expression that they cannot control. So you see that in the colonial days, especially in countries like in Southern Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe and the like, the colonial state dominated all forms of communication, the public media. Some were even throwing down pamphlets to people to, to call freedom fighters terrorists and stuff like that. But the people had their own means of communicating, from using smoke or using these young boys and girls who run around and spread messages, all sorts of things. And how did the colonial government react then? Stop these young boys and girls spreading messages. So this is how we have evolved. When you come to the era of democratization in the 1990s, where the rest of Africa is moving from state-owned broadcaster or state media to private media, they were not comfortable because now the private media was saying a message that they cannot control. So now what did they do? Stop private media because they are saying something different to them. So I'm not surprised right now they're uncomfortable about the internet. And it's not to do with Americans or with any ideologies. This is just an avenue of free expression that government feels they cannot control, and they're not happy about it. It's got nothing to do with with American ideologies.
So you're saying that human rights is what we're talking about, not American rights. It's human rights.
I don't want to get into that debate, but all I just want to say is to dismiss the idea that, in fact, the point that I want to put across is that the medium is not the message. Absolutely. These people are saying these things or are doing these things to address other social ills. What people are saying or doing in Facebook is actually existing in the real world. Let's address the real world issues first before saying we can shut down Facebook or Google, because it's not going to stop the issue. The issue is still there at State House most of the times.
Thank you. Marianne. Yes, please, go ahead and do that.
Yes, there are a couple of points there that I would like to address. Is basically the internet is just the latest tool for disseminating information, true or false. And it's basically, you know, we had, ever since humankind has been able to communicate either through grunts or more sophisticated language, language has been used to persuade people to your cause or to mislead people or to take some kind of strategic advantage. It is just the latest tool. And, you know, don't shoot the messenger is the appropriate message here. But also, one thing that governments need to realize, and those waiting to get into government, is that politics is about conflict. It's a fight. It's a fight for ideas. It's a fight for support. If you actually don't want to fight, then don't get into politics. And if you are in government and you have people wanting to get you out of government, there's probably a very good reason for that. And the fact that we have rumors being spread about countries' leaders being ill and dying, well, why do people believe that? Why do people want to believe that? Why do people not wait for government to make an official announcement? Probably because they no longer trust government. And one thing that has broken down tremendously amongst all groups, particularly lately, I think, is that no one knows who to trust anymore. Who's lying to you? What is fake news? Well, fake news has been around forever, and it will continue to be there. What is lacking is the critical ability to determine whether what you're reading is plausible, is true. How can you check whether it's true? Do you trust the people who are being the source of that information? And this is what needs to happen. It's an education problem. People need to engage in critical ideas. You know, internet, social media is just a new shiny tool that we're all agog with. And we must realize that this culture has been evolving, what, over 15, 20 years? We're still adolescents at this. We're still actually bumping our heads and getting the scars of growing up. And I think that we are growing up particularly rapidly right now. We're forming all sorts of new societies, all sorts of new norms. And I think that measures that have been taken, I think is it Google, is it Facebook, is doing a verification of news sites, which is great. We have, in this country, we have Africa Check, which any citizen can go to Africa Check and say, is this true? Please research it for us. And there are many organizations that need support. There's increasing money and resources being put into credible investigative journalism in this country. And all power to them. They need support because, you know, bloggers who are great at expressing their own opinions might not necessarily be telling you the truth, but then governments might not be telling you the truth either. There was, in my formative years as a journalist, a book that I prized most dearly, written by one of Britain's great investigative reporters, a fellow called Philip Knightley. And the book was called The First Casualty. And his thesis was that the first casualty in any war is the truth, because the government distorts the truth on how it's waging its war. So, you know, governments are not innocent in this, and if they actually don't want to listen to competing views, then they must actually get out of government altogether.
If you can't stand to eat, get out of the kitchen. James, you got many questions. I'm sure you want to start from number one.
The many questions can be summarized as just an opinion on Zimbabwe. I know we are in dire straits. We are living in perilous times. But sometimes it's unfair for you colleagues to look at us like that. What happens on social media or online, you are all aware can spread like wildfire. Just one blog can actually unseat a government. And that is what we call ripple effect. One thing leads to another. So as governments, we are supposed to guard against that. It's not a good thing for one government to come today, tomorrow is gone, the next day for another, and it's gone. Let us have governments live their terms, because you will have chosen them, you will have elected them. It's 5 years. After 5 years, after 5 years, we go to elections. And if the people choose us to be back in power, then so be it. Again, I want to stress that we will not shut down the internet. There is a question that was asked from behind there, but I think it would belong to the previous era where we did it once, but we are saying we will not shut down the internet again.
In the spirit of fact-checking, it wasn't once, but please go ahead. Okay. Oh, please go ahead, please go ahead.
And also, I would like to throw caution to this debate. We should not confuse the rights of privacy and freedom of expression, association. But we should also be aware that legally, these rights are not absolute. There are limitations to these rights. So, government has the prerogative to also look at these limitations and apply them where necessary. So,
that's it.
Facilitator.
Yes, sir.
I think I've answered them. And
it's up to them,
yes,
the people, to decide.
The people, yes, I've answered the people.
Yes.
And whatever you have, let it be just an opinion on Zimbabwe.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting you talked about on-sitting governments, and you know, so I was just sitting there and wondering, and this is not a new question, don't worry. Like you said, it's an opinion. Why are governments who believe they were elected by people so scared of being unseated by the people? And if they're so scared and the people think they have become unpopular, is that not a vote of no confidence in them? Just a rhetorical question, no, so that I don't ask more. Oh, you want to answer it? Okay. All right. Michael.
I'll take the question from Fiona about targeting individuals online and like just taking a general like random sampling where you just like you target everyone. I think if I may ask my sister Fiona a question, during the shutdown, was it in Cameroon? I think she's one of the people that were proposing through Afrinic that governments that shut down internet should be denied new IP addresses. Am I correct?
You're correct.
Yes, you are. Thank you. Now, if you deny a government IP addresses, you are going to shut down 0.20. Meaning, you're not solving the problem, you are actually accelerating the problem at another level. So, in as much as we would all not support shutdowns, but there are better ways of resolving these issues, as our brother has just said. So basically, when investigating matters where offensive content is posted online. People, at times, they use pseudonyms. They use anonymity like, to go online. But of course, when you go online, you leave what is called digital dust. There's the digital evidence that you leave behind. No matter how anonymous you are, you may use the Tor browser, the darknet. The fact of the matter is, the first time you used the internet, you used your real credentials. Whatever comes later, whether you start thinking in a criminal manner at some point, you would have left already the digital dust along the way. So basically, it's in the process of investigating matters to do with cybercrime, matters like in other countries, freedom of expression is not like enshrined in their constitution. They will say, like Uganda used to say, you have the right to freedom of expression, but you have no right after expressing your views. Meaning, whatever you can say it, but that right after you say it is not guaranteed. Yeah, I think, was it Idi Amin who said that? I think so. That was way back before the internet, actually. So basically, as somebody from the law enforcement, investigating matters of cybercrime is one of the most complex. It needs somebody who knows what they are doing. It needs somebody who understands the internet infrastructure from the top to the bottom. It needs somebody who knows what they want. Unlike if you say, no, in Johannesburg, there's some hate speech which are emanating from this website. Let's shut down internet. Where? In Johannesburg.
Okay. So I have one more question before your closing comments for everyone. I haven't called for questions, and she's standing. Is that a question or a follow-up comment? A follow-up comment. Are we going to allow follow-up comments? I think, okay. She's 30 seconds. I'm going to hold the mic for you. Okay, no, that would be censorship. Take the mic.
In context of the proposal we put in for Afrinic, the reason that we put, I think it's important that the community understands why that happened. Because we believe, and speaking for the businesses, we believe that it's possible to track individuals, as you have clearly explained, who are abusing resources such as the internet. There is no reason for governments to shut down the entire internet for any country or wherever. And so we developed that proposal really as a dangling stick to the Cameroonian government, knowing very well that we do not live in Cameroon, so it will be very difficult for the Cameroonian government to come and get me from Kenya to go and answer their questions in Cameroon. And knowing that we were a group of us, and speaking now, I was speaking as the Technology Service Providers Association of Kenya, where we are up to 70 operators. So I was their voice, and we were asking Afrinic to converse and review a proposal where governments that shut down internet for their citizens get penalized after they turn it back on. We don't give them resources again. We leave them without resources. They cannot and do whatever else because there are technologies that they would have to do to be able to continue being able to access the internet, though it would not be at a good standard. But the reason we did that was to put pressure on the United Nations and any other body that had powers to come in and put pressure on the Cameroonian government. After we released the proposal, it was viral. In 3 days, it had been translated to Chinese, to Russian, and it was questions were coming back to us in very different languages, and media houses wanted to understand what it was about. So the reason and the purpose for which we created that policy proposal was effective. However, it is very important that you understand the procedures by which Afrinic develops policies and the standards of policies within Afrinic. This policy did not meet the required standards. So there was no intention to have it going through, but because the governments do not take time to understand how the technology works, it became a good stick to hold as a technical community and tell the governments, we will do this. Thank you.
Sanctions. Okay, do we have more questions, or do you want me to ask them questions? I'm sure we have a few more questions. Do we? We don't. Okay, I'm going to do this as a last round of questions. So if you do have a question, raise your hand now, or the next time you raise them will be when you go through immigration. You also, okay, person.
I feel like we are taking some of the things for granted as an audience. I would maybe presume the government is doing this because of this, but because the government representatives are there, then I would like to understand, why are they so touchy? They are so touchy in things which concern them. You know, when it comes to cybercrime law, we don't have a problem. It's a very good law, as much as it has a lot of loopholes which has to be put there. The internet is there and it has to be monitored. So when, yeah, so the internet is there. Oh, I've been censored. Keep it on. My voice is kind of, okay, thank you. So I'm saying the cybercrime law, we need the cybercrime law. It has a lot of loopholes which has to be amended, but the cybercrime law has to be there. We have the internet. But the problem is, we have millions of money being lost in the bank accounts. We have a lot of people dying from cybercrime bullying. We have a lot of other things and other bad things happening to citizens as a result of the internet. Why is the government not concerned with that? They're so touchy with things which are not really that important to be worked on like they are working on in other issues.
So why are our governments, and this, sure, can you take 30 to ask this question? Okay.
It's a very short question around internet shutdowns. I think there's a lot of emphasis on freedom of expression, human rights, which is all great, and I'm with that conversation. But I also think we overlook the impacts of internet shutdowns on our digital economy. And at least in South Africa, we are moving towards the fourth industrial revolution, where economies now are going to be sort of backboned by the internet and innovation. So with the increase of internet shutdowns and I guess stringent internet regulation in our continent, what does that mean also for growth and development? 30 seconds, right?
I didn't check. Okay, so should I start with you, Michael?
Yeah, thank you. Just to answer our question about being, you used which term?
Why are governments so touchy?
Sensitive. Yeah, basically, you see, when it comes to matters, you've just said something like cyberbullying and other cybercrime laws. Basically, in Africa, we are good at enacting laws, and we have no capacity to enforce them. So in matters of cybercrime, you are from which country? Tanzania. Yeah, I know your laws, and there's, I think, one controversial part of the law. Is it, I think... Yeah. We have like new regulations. Yeah. Like you had the case for our brother from Jami Forum. And the most controversial aspect of that law was the article, was it 32 or 35? 32 and 38. Yeah, you are right. So basically, that law was hitting hard on the intermediaries. Is that not so? Yes. So basically, like you have a law, but to enforce that law is where you have problems. You have law enforcement officers who are not properly trained in matters of cybercrime. You have parliamentarians, as our sister has said, who do not actually understand issues, like they want to draft a law, comes to parliament for debate. If that law supports government, we will all say yes, because we cannot bite the finger that feeds us. So basically what I'm trying to say is, government will do the copy and the paste kind of laws. They will have the law enforcement agencies, but not bringing capacity to train them. You train them to understand, because I'm one person, like, I'm fortunate because I've done internet governance, I've done cybersecurity. So most of these issues, I understand them from the core. I understand them from the root. Even in areas of digital rights, I just bumped in by mistake. It was in such forums like this. It was in such forums like this where people will be talking EU about the, okay, I'll put it in brackets, EU, about the law enforcement agencies. And they were not there to respond. I would ask a question. At the end of the day, I became like, let me try this. Let me try to be the small voice that will awaken the other big voices. Of course, it's government through their official representative. Like, if I was here, like, in my official capacity from Zambia Police, I would have spoken in my official capacity, but I have limitation on what I'm going to say, not because of the freedom of expression, but I'm employed and there are conditions set on what I can say, what I can say. I'm not the official police spokesperson, neither am I the official government spokesperson in these matters, but I'll base my experience to just share based on the African experience, like from the law enforcement fraternity. I've mingled with so many law enforcement agencies. Recently, we had a course like in Mauritius, we had 3 people from Tanzania, and cases of like Jamie and other things came in. But of course, we are there to enforce the law. We're not there to explain, no, be one of those who like implement the law. So basically, at times, we're also put in a corner. We can't do anything. If a law is bad, it's not for me, the police, to say this law is bad. I'm just there to enforce it. So it starts with you, the members of the civil society. It starts with you, the individuals, to make an effort of sitting down with your parliamentarians, sitting down with your law enforcement agencies, hold workshops, tell them, teach them. One day they may not be in police uniform. They will be outside the police, and they'll still be affected by the very law that they were enforcing.
Thank you. I know that question is still hanging. Okay, I see you, Max. Maybe I'll come to you. Maybe. I'm watching the time. But who knows? Maybe Marian will answer that question. Marian and James, maybe you guys will answer that question. Why is government so sensitive?
I think it's because maybe they're unsure of their ground. Maybe they fear criticism. Maybe, like all of us, they're a bit sensitive about, being proved wrong. So yeah, they shouldn't be so sensitive. They need to grow up like the rest of us.
Ouch. 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 I'm still growing, because he asked me if I'm grown up. Fortune, you have any comments on that? There's still the second question about shutdowns and implications. Maybe you want to speak to that. And then I'll come to you, James.
Yeah, I think I can talk to that. Thank you, Yolanda, for bringing it up. It's a very important question. The majority of our countries in Africa are underperforming economically. So if you look at research that has been put out by researchers, academics, they're actually showing that the internet is contributing up to, here in South Africa, up to 2.5% to the gross domestic product, and that's 60 billion rand. That's not child's play. And just earlier we had Facebook launching a report on the impact on the economy of these shutdowns. So I think people have to put all of that in mind, that on a single day, when you shut down the internet, you're costing your economy this potential in US dollars. So I think it's something that people need to also start thinking of, because then this is something that can come and bite you in your ass, pardon the French, because
English.
Yeah, because if your economy is now bad and is collapsing because of your own action, citizens will go out to the streets and they'll unseat you. So you really have to start considering these issues.
Shutdowns are, there's lose-lose scenario. And I think you mentioned one point which is really important in terms of the report that was launched, the CIPESA report that was also released there. I think that maybe we'll give copies through every government official to the relevant people. It's really important to know these numbers and the impact. Yes, James.
Why are we touchy? We are only human. That's all we're saying. We are only human. We are a government of the people. What I want to leave with you, colleagues, is that from the government perspective, let's behave responsibly online. I think the whole of these 2 days, we have not talked about our own behavior online. So as government, I'm urging you to behave responsibly online. And when you do so, join the government bandwagon to advocate for this responsibility, encourage your colleagues, encourage your friends, and also encourage your relatives to do the same.
I agree 100% with James. Please put your hands together for James. Please do. Those who know me know what's coming. James, I agree with you that we must be responsible online. I think the biggest responsibility of every citizen is to make sure that the government that we voted and put in place do the right thing. And if they don't do the right thing, we whip them in line. So I agree with you, we must be responsible.
True. And also, if you choose to criticize government online, let me leave you with this Zimbabwean proverb, which says, Reva chinanga wakakwira churu, which translates in English to engage in gossip whilst standing on top of an anthill to avoid being caught unaware. So, if you behave irresponsibly and then start criticizing your president or any other government official online, that's irresponsibility, then you face the consequences. Please act responsibly online.
Governments must act responsibly, otherwise they face consequences. It is irresponsible of you not to criticize an irresponsible government. And I think that's absolutely true. I've got 2 minutes. Max, the reason I'm asking you, you wanted to ask a question, and the reason I'm coming to you is because I know you, that you are a good guy. So when I give you the mic, you spend 30 seconds, right? Because if it's more than 30 seconds, I'll report it to your government.
Okay. Mine wasn't a question. It was an addition to what the law enforcer said. Frankly, law enforcement is a challenge. And we have been in this kind of environment for 15 years. And after I was arrested, even the guys who were interrogating me didn't know what to ask me. So I had even to tip them on what to ask me. So there is a lot of challenges, and I happen to, I've gone through about 16 to 17 laws in my country. I became a lawyer so that I can defend myself. Even the lawyers themselves, the magistrates, you have to help them. So we still have a challenge, but I wonder why African governments can adapt these new laws and start implementing or enforcing them as soon as possible. It's a challenge.
We need to train everyone, and that's including ourselves. And you're right, anyone who's been a guest of a security agency in any African country will tell you that the conversations are very interesting, because at times you have to teach a class, but they don't pay you. All right, closing comments. I'm going to start with you, James. What is one thing you want people to remember that you said here at the Forum on Internet Freedom in Africa 2017 in Johannesburg?
Zimbabwe will not shut down the internet.
Retweet, like, repost. We have it on video. We'll share it widely.
I'm quite excited, actually, by what James is promising us. So we will hold you to that. We'll get on an NTL.
Wait a second, Fortune.
And then hold you to
Please,
that.
1 second.
I'm done.
One second. No, you're not done. You're not done. Zimbabwe will also not shut down WhatsApp, right? Just in case, technical.
No, we will not shut down anything.
Wow. Not even protests, not internet, not, okay.
Okay. So I want to go back to what I opened with, that the freedoms that we have offline also exist online. Yep.
Thank you, Fortune. Miriam.
Echo that, because we've got to be responsible online as citizens and as government. We have no more rights online than we have offline. So let's just bear with that. But I think that what we need to do is there's been tremendous discussion here over the past 2 days, and tremendous feeling and passion for our internet freedoms or our human rights. Yeah. And I think we need to actually decide, as we all go home, as to how we're actually going to take this forward, keep it alive, and become active citizens and encourage other people to become active citizens in defending our rights.
Thank you. Michael.
In the spirit of multi-stakeholderism, I would want to urge all of you to engage governments, the private sector. When I say government, I mean I include also law enforcement, the private sector, the business sector, and and all sectors that are relevant to the conversation. Like when you have such big meetings like this one, please do not leave law enforcement out. You leave them, you continue complaining.
Can I ask that you please join me in putting our hands together for this awesome panelist? James is smiling. We're inviting you to Abuja next year. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to leave this final, few words since we have 47 seconds. Governments that are scared of what they're seeing their citizens do right now will soon be more scared. Things are going to get worse, okay? And the reason is very simple. Access is spreading. Access is increasing. So a lot more people who have not been able to express themselves will get online and be able to express themselves. Devices are getting cheaper, which means that in areas where they couldn't afford a phone to install an app on, we'll be able to complain a lot more also. And apart from that, internet access is getting cheaper in some places. I have to qualify, in some places, okay? So this is gonna get hotter, and we're excited about it, because one of the things that this kind of conversations will force is that governments will grow up. And when governments do grow up, when they say things like citizens should be responsible, we will be responsible. Responsible enough to make sure that governments do not do the wrong thing. And when they do the wrong thing, we do the right thing, which is to call them to order and at times call them out and embarrass them publicly. Thank you very much. And thank you for the questions. That's it.